Sisters and brothers in the Dharma, Namo Buddhaya, Jai Bhim.
Jai Bhim.
So for those of you not at Padmaloka, not with the 18 of us here in the shrine room at Padmaloka, a very warm welcome to Padmaloka on our day retreat, our weekly day retreat. We've been in silence this morning after both before and after our meditation, and the rest of the day we'll be doing more meditation and puja in the evening. And I know many people who write to me about these talks, one of the things they say they really like is to see the Padmaloka community. So Satyakirti is going to pan round. Satyakirti is our wonderful filmmaker, and he's going to pan round the community so you can see who's here. Of course, the only person you didn't see then was Satyakirti himself, who's doing the filming. So perhaps he can, I don't know, he's going to do something. This is Satyakirti. And that's important because Satyakirti does all of our videos, and we're very grateful to him for that. Yes, it's, I think we're getting on for 2 months now, aren't we, in this strange situation. I say 2 months, but in some ways that seems a bit meaningless because time has taken on another meaning, I suppose, during this time. And we've been exploring the Bodhicaryavatara, the entry into the Bodhisattva's life, the guide to the Bodhisattva's life. And last week we looked at Kshanti Paramita, the perfection of patience and forbearance. And you'll remember that Shantideva's discussion of patience is very thorough. It's one of the longest chapters in the Bodhicaryavatara. And it's a very profound discussion. Kshanti involves a profound transformation in relation to others, in relation to life. I think it's well worth meditating on that just a little bit more. You remember that last week, Shantideva ends up by saying that in the end patience is about revering all others, especially those who would harm us, revering the most difficult and demanding people and situations, treating them as you would treat the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, which is quite an extraordinary and very hard to imagine vision of life, given how devotional Shantideva is to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. He also opened up the whole area of patience in relation to wisdom. Throughout the Bodhicaryavatara, Shantideva sort of salts his text with reflections on Prajna Paramita, which is treated more thoroughly in the 9th chapter. He hinted at this realization of what is known in the Mahayana generally as the Anutpatika Dharma Kshanti, the patient acceptance of the unborn and unarisen nature of all dharmas, of life itself, which leads to profound peace and calm, because you see everything as Maya, as an illusion, as a mirage. I've been reflecting on this quite a lot because it intrigues me, this particular realization, and I might come back to it a bit later on in the series, towards the end of the series. I don't quite know why I'm attracted by that. I think it's perhaps just a rather puzzling saying, acceptance of the unborn or the unarisen nature of all things and everybody, and yet that in itself involves the great compassion. And I was reflecting that perhaps another way of looking at this is in terms of forgiveness. Kshanti can also include forgiveness. The word Kshanti can include forgiveness. And we know how important forgiveness is in human life. In fact, it's very hard to have any human community without forgiveness. It's very hard to have any spiritual community, perhaps impossible to have a spiritual community without forgiveness. Bhante wrote a little bit about forgiveness in his final years, and he said he often thought that William Blake's aphorism, mutual forgiveness of every vice, such are the gates of paradise. I think that's how it goes. And he thought that would be a very good motto for a spiritual community. And forgiveness is not just to do with the forgiving of a particular act done by somebody. It's strange, sometimes I've been thinking about forgiveness, that if I'm still thinking, I have forgiven you, I still haven't fully forgiven. I think real forgiveness is almost the realization in the end that there is no fault. There is no fault. No fault has been done. If you're still thinking in terms of being the arbiter of forgiveness, perhaps you're still thinking in terms of fault. A writer that was very not at all popular these days, hardly well known these days, hardly known at all, that Bhante liked reading at a certain period in his life, John Middleton Murray. He wrote very beautifully about forgiveness. He said that forgiveness is not in any way passive. It's a profound forgiveness of things. It's not just in relation to particular acts. It's forgiveness for the dukkha, for the suffering, woven into the fabric of life. So it means that there's tremendous patience, tremendous understanding, tremendous tenderness, tremendous love, a tremendous trembling with, a deep vibrating with, the Buddhist term is anukampa, trembling with others, and if you like, the pressures and the oppressions that they are under. And he quotes a translation from a short story by Chekhov, where a character says, "And all things are forgiven, for it would be strange not to forgive." So perhaps that's where patience, Kshanti Paramita, leads us in the end to a state where we could say, "And all things are forgiven, for it would be strange not to forgive." And of course, if you are in that kind of state of forgiveness where you've let go, you've completely relinquished any sense of grudge or any sense of hurt done by anybody in relation to you, because you've seen the nature of life, well, surely when that happens, there's a tremendous release of energy. At his highest level, at their highest level, the Bodhisattva is just free-flowing energy. And as Bhante says, the end of the spiritual path is spontaneous, compassionate activity, which he describes as doing what needs to be done. Doing what needs to be done. There is nothing inside you. No block, no negativity, no poison, no fear, no attachment that prevents you from doing what needs to be done. Whatever is needed for the person, the people, the beings in front of you. You do what needs to be done. And to reach this level of energy, of course, we need tremendous energy. We need tremendous inspiration and vigour. We need to practice virya paramita, the perfection of vigour. Virya is a very masculine term, if you look it up in the Sanskrit dictionary. It's very interesting, this business of using that word masculine. In his own lecture series on the Bodhisattva ideal, Bhante describes the Bodhisattva as a living contradiction. A living contradiction. The Bodhisattva brings together all opposites. And one of the things he brings together is the so-called masculine qualities, the so-called feminine qualities. In his lecture, he put masculine and feminine in single inverted commas. He's talking poetically, not scientifically or anything like that. And he said very often people didn't notice the single inverted commas. So the Bodhisattva, yes, is gentle and tender, profoundly receptive, profoundly open to others, with all that patience and forgiveness and understanding. At the same time, the Bodhisattva is strong, powerful, active, and vigorous. Both of those qualities are in the Bodhisattva. This isn't to be theorized about. This is to be lived fully. When we studied the Bodhisattva Ideal lecture series with Bhante in Tuscany in 1984, he says you can't have a kind of concept that really describes this living contradiction, this synthesis, this higher synthesis of opposites. This needs to be lived fully. This is lived fully in the life of the Bodhisattva. Through living out the Bodhisattva vow, you realize the unity of opposites. Living the Bodhisattva vow for the Bodhisattva with energy, with full energy. Virya, in the Sanskrit dictionary, tells us that it can mean valor, strength, power, energy, heroism, effort. Let's hear what Shantideva has to say about it with the first 3 verses from the Bodhicaryavatara. Having become patient, one should cultivate vigour, because enlightenment depends on vigour. For without vigour, there is no merit, just as there is no movement without wind. What is vigour? The endeavour to do what is skillful. What is the opposite of vigour? Sloth, clinging to what is vile, despondency, and self-contempt. Sloth comes from idleness, indulging in pleasures, sleep, the longing to lean on others, and from apathy for the sufferings of existence. So that's his sort of definition, if you like, of virya. And the first thing he makes very clear, there is no enlightenment without vigour. No bodhi, no enlightenment for all beings without virya paramita, without the perfection of virya. There is no lazy man's guide to enlightenment. There is no such thing as a lazy path. I think there was a book years ago, The Lazy Man's Guide to Enlightenment. Perhaps it was just a skillful means, and actually it was full of teachings on vigour. I don't know, I never read it. But enlightenment depends on vigour. I think there is a synonym for, or one of the descriptions of enlightenment of Bodhi as the bliss of effort. Without vigour, there is no punya. There is no merit, no goodness. Punya comes from the skillful actions that we perform. As he says, just as there is no movement without wind. And here, according to the commentators, this whole business about movement without wind, a strange sort of, to us, strange idea in Indian physiology, that we move because of the wind inside us. The subtle winds, they make us move. So it's quite a powerful point he's making. So in the same way that the body needs the wind to move, these subtle energies inside us, without that it can't move. Without virya, there is no goodness. There is no skillful action. There is no skillful behaviour. Therefore there is no punya. Therefore there is no enlightenment. It's as strong as that. Of course, by virya, we need to be very precise. It's movement in the direction of enlightenment. Energy in pursuit of the good. As he says, what is vigour? The endeavour to do what is skillful. Skillful, the word being kushala. Virya is not any old energy. It's not busyness for the sake of it. Some people have a lot of energy, but it's not directed to the skillful. It's not in itself skillful. It's quite the opposite of that. And Buddhists need to be as very, very well aware of that. We really need to ask ourselves, where does our energy come from? What's motivating our energy? And what are we doing with that energy? Because the energy, the virya itself, has to be skillful, directed to the skillful. It's worth, I think, just reflecting a little bit more deeply on the meaning of the word kushala. You're very familiar with the usual definitions of it that you hear probably on your first night of a Buddhist course when you're studying ethics. This is Bhante's definition of skillful from the 10 Pillars of Buddhism, which is a book on the 10 precepts that we take as order members. Kushala is a very important term, he says. In its broader significance, it means clever, skillful, or expert, in the sense of knowing how to act in a way that is beneficial rather than otherwise. Kushala karma, or skillful action, thus is action which is directed towards securing, both for oneself and others, the best possible results in terms of happiness, knowledge, and freedom. That is, it is action which is constantly mindful of the law of karma, as well as of the painful, impermanent, and insubstantial nature of conditioned existence, and of the blissful, permanent, and empty nature of the unconditioned. So that's a very, very strong definition of skillful. And this is really what Shantideva is talking about when he talks about virya paramita. It's virya for the attainment of enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. That's virya paramita. He uses this word endeavour here, the endeavour to do what is skillful. Endeavour is a translation of the Sanskrit utsaha, which according to Andrew Skilton and Kate Crosby is Shantideva's preferred synonym for virya. Utsaha means strength, energy, effort, and so on. But it also includes notions or connotations of joy, happiness, and inspiration. It's very, very interesting. I mentioned a few weeks ago Dr. Ambedkar's conversion speech after the great conversion to Buddhism. And in that speech he talks a lot about energy, the need for people to have energy. And the Marathi words he uses is utsaha. And you talk to friends of mine in India tell me that utsaha is a very uplifting term, a very rousing term in Marathi. It's not just make an effort, but rouse yourself, be inspired for a better, a higher life. It has connotations of dignity and self-respect. I think for this reason, some translators have translated virya paramita as the perfection of joyous perseverance. It's a lovely phrase, isn't it? Virya paramita, the perfection of joyous perseverance. This is very, very important, I think, because I've noticed that people, whenever you discuss, have you noticed this? Whenever you have a discussion of energy, virya of any kind, immediately people bring up the problem of willfulness and burnout. Have you noticed that? If we're talking about our sort of desires and craving and all that sort of thing, willfulness doesn't come into that sphere of discourse. Apparently, when we do all those unskillful things or not so skillful things, we're not being willful. It's only when it comes to the Dharma that there is the danger of willfulness and the danger of burnout. Have you noticed that? I've noticed that. We have to remember that virya is about being inspired. It's inspired energy. It's joyous energy. This is going to sound like a contradiction, even if you're not feeling any inspiration and joy. That sounds like a strange thing to say, but you're calling on something much deeper. So even when things are not that pleasant, not that easy, when the energy isn't flowing, your virya, your strength, your volition is still there because you want to behave meaningfully. Because It's the expression, virya is the expression of that deep connection with the meaning and purpose of life, living the bodhisattva path. Sometimes when I've been in discussions of burnout with people, I've said to people, whenever I felt I've got close to burnout, I've never really burnt out in my life at all. I mean, just a few times I've sort of perhaps gone a bit too far. I've reflected and I thought, when I've got near that, it's because I've been lazy. People are usually shocked when I say that, but it's true. Because what I've done is that I've been just acting compulsively and neglected the effort to give attention to what really needs to be given attention to. Willfulness and burnout come from compulsion. Virya can never lead to burnout because you're expressing the deepest meaning of your existence. So if you're getting near to burnout, ask yourself if you're just being weirdly lazy because you're distracting yourself from what is deeply meaningful. He talks about the opposition to virya, not just the opposites to virya, but what opposes virya within us. He talks about sloth, which is idleness, indulging in sleep. He talks about leaning on others, not taking responsibility for yourself. He talks about apathy and indifference to the sufferings of samsara. We can also include in here daydreaming and fantasizing about how wonderful our life could be when we're not actually really doing anything. He also talks about self-contempt and despondency. These all oppose virya. These are all aspects of laziness. We'll be exploring these in a bit more detail as we go on. It's also worth noting here, although Shantideva doesn't mention this, in Gampopa's celebrated the jewel ornament of liberation, which is another key text in our for Sangharakshita and for our movement. In Gampopa's discussion of virya and his discussion of laziness in the perfection of virya, he talks about gross laziness. And he says gross laziness is addiction to those unwholesome activities of making money and subduing enemies. That's gross laziness. In other words, business and politics are the expression of gross laziness. I would also include in this anxious activity. Activity which is running on anxiety, no matter how worthy the task may seem to be on the outside. Anxious activity, fearful activity, competitive activity. That is laziness. It's not virya, because you're not acting from what is deepest in you. There's a saying of Bhante's in Pieces of Fire: any kind of life which is not making any effort to evolve is escapism. Any kind of life which is making no effort to evolve is escapism. Any kind of life. So you might be incredibly active, but if you're not evolving, on the bodhisattva path for the benefit of self and other, that's escapism. Therefore it's laziness. So Shantideva really, as usual, gets quite tough. We don't know who he's talking to. Some people say he's talking to himself. Probably is talking to himself, but when you read it, you feel he's talking to you. And he does another exhortation in the verses that follow about really waking up and getting real and really waking up to our situation. More reflections on death. Scented out by the trappers, the defilements, you have walked into the trap of birth. Do you not realize even now that you have entered the mouth of death? Do you not see those of your own herd as they are killed one by one? You even go to sleep like a buffalo at the butcher. When Yama, the Lord of Death, is sizing you up, and at every turn the way is blocked, how can it please you to eat? How can you sleep? How can you make love? Even if you abandon your sloth as death is swiftly approaching, his implements prepared, it will be too late. What will you do? I have not started this. This I started, but it remains half done. Death has come from nowhere. Oh no, I am stricken. So sensitive. Hey you, expecting results without effort. So long suffering. You, in the clutches of death, acting like an immortal. Hey, sufferer, you are destroying yourself. Now that you have met with the boat of human life, cross over the mighty river of suffering. Fool, there is no time to sleep. It is hard to catch this boat again. He's really tough, isn't he? I'm not sure that I'd be able to handle a teacher like that. But he tells us also what we need to develop, and so don't despair. So let's read some more verses. How can you, after letting go of the most splendid delight, the Dharma, which is an unending stream of joy, find joy in a cause of suffering such as arrogance or ridicule? Freedom from despair, the array of powers including dedication and self-mastery, regarding oneself and others as equal, and the exchange of self and others should be practiced, and not defeatism from thinking, how could I possibly achieve Buddhahood? For the Tathagata, speaker of the truth, spoke this truth. Even those who are gnats, mosquitoes, wasps, or worms have reached the highest enlightenment, hard to reach through the strength of their exertion. How about me, born a human being, able to know good from bad? If I do not forsake the guidance of the omniscient, why should I not attain Buddhahood? So Shantideva does really challenge us. He invokes death. And, when we get into that state, well, I haven't achieved this, I haven't finished this, I've started this, but I haven't finished this. That's not a good approach to things, all that. But he does also talk about the delights of the Dharma as a source of an unending joy. So it's very, very important if we're to practice Vigour is to look for that juice, that delight in the pleasures of the Dharma. Perhaps for us that's more important than reflecting on death and so on. So wherever you get that juice at any time, really make the most of it. Meditation, study, meeting with friends, puja, and all of the indirect methods that we've talked about over the years in Triratna that we encourage, participation in the arts and so on and so forth. We have much to do. We need to have so much dedication and commitment. There's so much of mastering ourselves we have to do. So we need that juice, that delight in the Dharma. And it is a big task that we've committed ourselves to. At one point in the text, Shantideva says, well, look, you really need to weigh things up. Are you going to start or not? Much better not to start than to start and not finish. He's very, very strong on that. Whether it's a day-to-day thing, if you start something, finish it. If it's a solitary retreat, you start it and you finish it. My friends here will laugh because I've sometimes left solitary retreats early. Well, that's a bad habit of mine. But it's also the task of the spiritual life itself. If you start it, see it through. So really weigh things up. And it is a big task that we've set ourselves. This total transformation of our entire being, working for the benefit of others. And it's easy to be daunted. It's so easy to think, well, I just can't do it. You look back over the years, I look back sometimes after, how many decades of practice. I have this thing where people introduce me and they always say, well, Padmavajra is wonderful because he found the Dharma when he was 17. I find that acutely embarrassing these days. I used to think that's a great badge of honour. These days, I find it embarrassing because, well, what have you got to show for having the opportunity for being involved with the Dharma for so long? But, we can, yes, sometimes feel really low. We can feel like a gnat or a wasp or a worm or a mosquito, but that's okay. It's okay if you feel like a really small, insignificant being with not much to you. It's okay because the Buddha said that even beings like that can gain enlightenment. That's no problem. So however you feel, don't despair. Wherever we are in our Dharma life, and no matter how little progress we feel we've made, the Buddha is very, very clear. Anybody can gain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. Like many stories, I've told this story before, but it's worth repeating in relation to this. In times gone by, Sangharakshita's Bhante's office was at Padmaloka in the main house, and he had his secretaries here, and he was away a lot of the time in London. And one evening his secretaries were away, and they asked me if I would sit in the office and just man the phone, just in case Bhante phoned up with something. So I manned the phone, and sure enough, Bhante telephoned, and he said, "Oh, hello, Padmavajra, and how are you?" Very, very warm, very friendly, very, very pleased to hear my voice. And he said, "Well, how are you?" And I said, "Well, Bhante, I'm feeling a little bit down, actually." I said, "Subhuti's left." Because when I moved to Padmaloka, Subhuti was here. All these heavyweights like Subhuti and Sona and Suvadra and Aloka and so on were here. And then one by one they all left. So I really felt that. I really felt it when Subhuti left. And I said, and Bhante just came and said, "Well, I feel Subhuti's absence." Subhuti had gone off to Spain to write a book. "I miss Subhuti." Oh, right, okay. And I said, "But it's not just that, Bhante." I said, "I just feel my progress is so slow." I said, "It's not just slow. My progress seems to be infinitesimal. Hardly anything seems to be happening." And he just said, "No, it's measurable. Measurable." I said, "No, but Bhante, it's infinitesimal." He said, "Measurable, measurable." He just kept saying this word, measurable, measurable, like a mantra. He just wouldn't have it. He wouldn't have my self-pity. He wouldn't have that. And it was so encouraging. And the message was, no, you've come some way. And you can do it. And, after Bhante died, I realised his message to me consistently was, you can do it. You have the ability, you have the potential, you have everything you need to make progress. So none of this self-indulgence. So we can, yes, suffer from the laziness of defeatism, of leaning on others, which is certainly a bad habit of mine, has been over the years. And, I still feel that. And Bhante's message has always been, stop leaning, stand up, take responsibility for yourself. I mean, I can even have this, it doesn't happen so much these days, but I have had that strange kind of mindset where I can say, well, the Dharma's wonderful, and expound on the Dharma, and it's wonderful, but at the back of my mind, but I can't do it. Dharma's wonderful, but I can't do it. As if, I'm one of those, I'm that exception to the Buddha's teaching. I mean, the Dharma is wonderful because everybody can make progress in Dharma life. So there's a kind of self-indulgence on my part, and perhaps with other people as well, in relation to this despair and defeatism of I can't do it. Shantideva calling out, hey you! So sensitive. Very, very, that's the kind of thing we need to be listening to. Hey you, wake up! Stop being so sensitive, get on with it. And it is slowly. Vigour isn't just the sort of slash and burn approach to the path to enlightenment. It's not what Bhante called a smash and grab raid on the absolute. It's slow, it's steady. We cannot immediately bring about a full self-surrendering, which the Bodhisattva is. Shantideva is very, very good on this in his particular way. He says the Buddha is the great physician. He gives the greatest cure to the worst disease that affects everybody, the disease of ignorance, attachment, aversion, all the poisons, everything that prevents full and total happiness and satisfaction. Yes, we know, like other cures, the Dharma life can be painful and difficult at times. But the Buddha's regimen, says Shantideva, is madhura, beautiful word, madhura, which means sweet, delicious, pleasant, charming, delightful, because it's a gradual regimen. It's a gradual cure for the greatest, the deepest illness. And it's gradual, and that gradual approach is measured by Shantideva in terms of what the Buddha asks us to give. He says, first of all, the Buddha encourages just to give a few very simple things, just to give a few vegetables to a beggar or a wandering holy man. And that's how we start. We start with the things that are manageable. We give a bit of money, we get a bit of time, give a bit of energy. We get into a routine of practice to support others. In the end, by degrees, says Shantideva, the Buddha's regimen, his sweet cure, brings about fashions someone who is prepared to give their own flesh and body, who have that degree of selflessness. They're so transformed by the bodhicitta. They can even regard their own body as just being like a vegetable. So it's so easy to give. I think he's having one of his funny sort of jokes, Shantideva. But it's true, this slow, gradual development. We have a long way to go. It's measurable. That's the important thing. So perhaps if you're in one of those defeatist and despairing moods, just look back. Just look back a bit at how much you have changed. Just have a look in that way, or go to a spiritual friend who can show you, no, that's moved, that's changed. And don't despair, because there is the power of the bodhicitta. Shantideva said the power of the bodhicitta alone can bring about movement on the bodhisattva path. The bodhicitta bala, the power of the bodhicitta. And he says the bodhisattva will progress more quickly than others if they rely on the power of the bodhicitta, on that force. So we practice intensely to open up to that bodhicitta bala, that force of bodhicitta. In this way we will travel, we will go to greater and greater happiness, to greater and greater sukha and satisfaction and bliss for the benefit of ourselves and others. When he talks about the bodhicitta bala, the power of the bodhicitta, he describes the bodhicitta as the bodhicitta rata. The bodhicitta rata. A rata, they translate it as the carriage of the bodhicitta in the Skilton and Crosby translation. But a rata is actually a two-wheeled war chariot. A two-wheeled war chariot. Shantideva is not at all frightened to use very, very warlike military imagery. So the bodhicitta is swift, like a two-wheeled war chariot, swift and responsive. And he says, what thinking person could possibly despair in such a chariot of emptiness and love, of emptiness and compassion? There will be no weariness or despair when you are in that chariot. So it makes it he makes it very clear, yes, we need to cultivate virya, but virya paramita in the end is being carried by the free-flowing energy of the bodhicitta. And then Shantideva helps us to understand how we can develop and sustain virya. The verses, according to the commentary, the rest of the verses in the chapter, are distributed, according to the commentaries, over to describe 6 powers, 6 balas, which comprise virya paramita. These are the power of desire, secondly, the power of pride, thirdly, the power of delight, fourthly, the power of letting go, fifthly, the power of dedication, and finally, the power of self-mastery. So we'll just go through these. So first of all, the power of desire. The word for desire here is chanda. Usually, of course, we think of desire as being an unskillful state. But the Buddha distinguishes between 2 kinds of chanda. There's kamma chanda, which is desire for sense pleasures, and there's dharma chanda, which is desire for the dharma, wholesome, righteous desire, if you like. The fact is, we cannot make and sustain virya unless our emotions are deeply involved with what we're doing. We are profoundly emotional beings, as Bhante says in Where Buddhism Begins and Why It Begins There. We are profoundly desiderative beings. We're beings made of desire. Made of desire. So if desire is not engaged, there will be no progress. This has been a great theme of Bhante's over the decades of his teaching. Very early on, he made that point, which is still relevant and should be meditated on probably every day. The central problem of the spiritual life for most people is finding emotional equivalence to intellectual understanding. Emotional equivalence to intellectual understanding. We know what to do. Our heart and our emotions are just not behind what we know what to do. We have it in our own language, in English. We say his or her heart, it just isn't in it. So they're doing something, but their heart isn't in it. So nothing is happening. Our heart has to be in it. Our heart has to be in the Bodhisattva path, or it will not work. To arouse his desire, Shantideva has yet more self-critical verses. He doesn't seem to mind being really self-critical. He deplores his lack of generosity. He deplores his failure to participate in the great festivals of worship of the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. So he's using this self-criticism to really rouse himself with the desire to practice. And he reflects that the Buddha teaches that the root of desire is constant meditation on the results of actions. Constant meditation on the fact that skillful action has positive results for self and other, beneficial results for self and other. Unskillful action lead to downfall for self and other. He talks about the skillful leading to the heart's delight. Beautiful phrase. The skillful leading to the heart's delight. He talks about the heart's delight of those who act beautifully. The word is shubha, which is often translated as good, but it literally means beautiful or pure. The heart's delight of those who act skillfully. That is already very attractive, isn't it? That's very appealing. That acting beautifully, acting skillfully leads to the heart's delight. It leads to the heart's delight because if you act with love and with generosity and with truthfulness, people will welcome you. People will love you. You will be attractive to people. You'll develop friendships with people, community will develop around you, or you'll develop community with others. So we need to meditate on that kind of effect of our skillful actions to awaken the desire of how desirable it is to practice virya in the direction of the good. And he gives us a vision. He then goes into a vision, really talking about where skillful action, where virya in the direction of the skillful leads. Born in the womb of late-growing lotuses, expansive, sweet-smelling and cool, with thriving splendour, granted by the sustenance of the conqueror's melodious voice, their beautiful forms emerging from the water-born lotuses, as they blossom in the rays of light from the sage, the sons of the Sugata appear before him in consequence of their skillful deeds. So it's a vision of spiritual rebirth, rebirth in the Pure Land, rebirth in the land of bliss, rebirth in the land of Sukhavati. After this, he does immediately contrast this with a sort of fearful vision of hell, which I'm not going to dwell on. Interestingly, in Bhante's commentary on the Bodhicaryavatara, the endlessly fascinating cry, he says we don't really need to dwell on these sufferings of hell. He's not very keen on it. He said because we just have to contemplate the sufferings of the world. They're strong enough. We don't need to invoke anything else. Perhaps we might reflect upon the suffering, the horror of a banal and meaningless life if we really don't live meaningfully according to the Dharma. Perhaps that's the kind of hell that we could end up inhabiting if we're not careful. But let's stay with Shantideva's incredibly sensual image of the bodhisattvas emerging from their lotuses because of their skillful action in the Pure Land to listen to the Dharma taught by the Buddha. It's, yes, the vision of the pure Buddha field, as it's called, this transcendental archetype. Enlightenment evoked as a whole realm, a whole world, not just a state of mind. And of course, the Bodhisattva practices, another very attractive way of describing the Bodhisattva path, is people working together, Bodhisattvas working together to create a pure Buddha field, to create a Buddha land, where everything is supportive of the Dharma life, where everything is reflective of reality, working together for that, drawing on this transcendental, timeless archetype of the Pure Land, of this vision of beauty and meaning, and translating that into our activity on this earth, as it were. It's so important that our vision of enlightenment touches our heart, touches our deepest desires and responses. This is why our shrine room is filled with images, is filling with images. Aloka has this saying that unless a spiritual community is throwing up images, unless images are emerging out of a spiritual community, it will cease to be a spiritual community. And he means by that people's profound emotions, the depths of their emotions, are being profoundly involved in their Dharma life, that they're living from a myth, a deep myth, and from deep meaning. So we really need to activate the heart. These images are not illustrations, allegories for the spiritual life. They're there to spark off our deepest energies. This is why, one of the reasons why, at the time of ordination, order members are initiated into the mantra of a particular Buddha or Bodhisattva. This comes originally from the Tantric tradition. In the Indian Tantric tradition, they call what in Tibetan Buddhism is called the Yidam, which means something like oath-bound. In Indian Tantric Buddhism, they use the word Ishtadevata, which is a little bit problematic because it's also a word used in Hinduism. But the reason why the Buddhists used it is because Ishta means greatly desired, greatly longed for deity deity here meaning a Buddha or a Bodhisattva, and you take a figure that you long for, that you desire, that touches you at the deepest possible level, and yet embodies the whole realm of undefined meaning, reflective of indefinable enlightenment. It's very hard to describe what meditating regularly on a figure like this does to one. It is interesting. This dimension of refuge is called guhya. It's secret. It's hidden. It's mysterious. All I can say from meditating on a figure like that regularly, what emerges is tremendous energy and inspiration to live out the Bodhisattva principle in everything I do. That's what is really happening when you meditate on a form like that, and it starts to perfume and pervade your whole life. And it's something, this being, this myth, this whatever you want to call it, this Bodhisattva, you grow very close to. In Tantric Buddhism, they talk about different sort of levels of practice that you move through, of deeper and deeper intimacy, not just when you're doing the meditation itself, but in your life generally. You begin as a servant, serving the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, serving your particular Buddha or Bodhisattva. It's very, very top down, and you never really leave that. But as time goes on, or you have glimpses that the Buddha or Bodhisattva is a friend, is an intimate, even a lover. And you also start developing, as you do this practice, a sense of dignity and positive pride. In Tantric Buddhism, they talk about the Vajra pride, the pride of identifying with your personal deity. And you will do nothing that goes against the dignity of that quality of enlightenment in all you do. So this brings us to the second of Shantideva's balas, powers for the practice of virya, the power of pride. And he said one should practice the power of pride according to the Vajradvaja Sutra, which is something he quotes from he quotes in the Shiksha Samujjaya. Vajradvaja, interestingly enough, means the Vajra flag sutra, the Vajra banner. The word for pride is mana, and it's usually an unskillful state. It's a defilement, it's a klesha. It's a very unskillful state, conceit. This view, especially that you are superior to others and you can end up looking down on others, you can be contemptuous of others and have no empathy and understanding of them at all. It can affect people, it can affect Buddhists. I mean, especially if you have qualities yourself and abilities and you're making sort of progress, it's very easy to get impatient with others and even look down on others. But Shantideva's, that's thoroughly negative and needs to be expunged, very, very strongly. There's no good in that at all. But Shantideva's use of mana is different. By pride, he means something more like courageous self-confidence. Courageous self-confidence, a positive dignity, real self-respect. And he makes a number of points. Let's just listen to him. So the first thing is, again, this business to do with pride, is this business to do with making sure you complete what you start. After first assessing the full implications, one should either begin or not begin. Surely not beginning is better than turning back once one has begun. This is a habit that continues in another life, and from its evil suffering increases. Another life and opportunity for action both lost, and the task not accomplished. So that's very, very important. As I said, you complete what you start, because it will undermine you. It undermines your self-respect. I know for myself, when I haven't seen something through, there's a loss of confidence that goes with that. So really make sure that you see through what you take on. And of course, there's the grand scheme of the Bodhisattva path. See it through. If you've asked for ordination, see it through. If you're an order member, see it through. He goes a bit further. He talks about this business of counteracting the tendency to lean on others. So pride is also taking full responsibility. He reflects, this world is totally subject to the defilements, incapable of accomplishing its own benefit. Therefore, I must do it for them. I am not incapable, as is mankind. I must do it for them. I think this is a really interesting reflection. And I think it also counteracts that sense of defeatism. Sometimes you can have a sort of feeling, well, why am I doing this? Why are we doing this? We're not good enough to do this. We're not good enough to live this life for the benefit of others. But looking around, well, who else is there? If you don't do it, then who will do it? This is one of the things that Bhante said of himself. He didn't aim to start a new Buddhist movement. He saw a need. He saw a need and he responded. And he was under no illusions that he wasn't the best. He was definitely not the best person to do this. But who else was going to do it? Who else was actually going to do these things? And sometimes it's like that. Look around. Who else is going to do this if you don't do this? So take responsibility by having a good look around. And he goes a bit further in talking about pride and even, having a go at the negative pride. When one is made passive by defeatism, without doubt difficulties easily take effect. But exerting oneself and invigorated, one is hard to defeat even with great calamities. So with a firm mind, I shall make difficulty for difficulty. For so long as difficulties conquer me, my desire to conquer the three worlds is laughable. For I must conquer everything. Nothing should conquer me. This pride should be wedded to me, for I am a son of the lion-like conqueror. So again, very, very strong language that Shantideva is using, and very, very much invoking the warrior ideal. I'm going to take this on. I'm going to fight against difficulty. I'm going to make difficulty for the kleshas. I'm going to be like the son of the lion-like conqueror. Very, very strong stuff. He then talks about what virya is really like. When you're really filled with this positive, flowing energy and determination, when you're full of the best possible pride and courageous self-confidence, he says this: one should be addicted solely to the task that one is undertaking. One should be intoxicated by that task, insatiable, like someone hankering for the pleasure and fruit of love play. He really doesn't mind, does he? He really doesn't mind using this sort of imagery that we can get very, very excited about in ordinary life. The really intoxicated by love play. But he's talking about the delights of meditation, of study, of organising things, of dharma work, of any task which is done for the transformation of self and world. He's talking about total emotional involvement in our effort to bring about transformation. It should be like that. It should be like making love. It should have that quality of delight in it. So it's quite a reflection, I think, for us on the kind of emotional involvement Shantideva is invoking. This brings us to the next of the powers, the power of delight. The power of delight. So there's a few verses here. A task is performed for the sake of satisfaction, notwithstanding that there may or may not be satisfaction. But how can one for whom the task itself is satisfaction be satisfied without a task? One cannot get enough of the sensual pleasures in cyclic existence that are like honey on a razor's edge. How can one get enough of the benign ambrosial acts of merit, sweet in their result? So even at the conclusion of one task, one should plunge straight away into the next, as does a tusker inflamed by the midday heat immediately on coming to a pool. So he's really talking about realizing that Dharma actions give their own satisfaction. They are incredibly pleasurable if you are really giving your heart to them, they really are the expression of your self-confidence and self-respect. Worldly pleasures will never end. It's a very interesting thing a point he's making here, that we hanker after worldly pleasures, but they will never actually give satisfaction. So they're endless, whereas Dharma pleasures, you can be insatiable for them. Very interesting way of looking at things. Then there is the next power, the power of letting go. The power of letting go. The word here is tyaga. Tyaga means leaving, abandoning, renouncing. So this is what he says about the power of letting go. Just one verse, by the way, on the power of letting go, which is perhaps significant. But when one's energy begins to flag, one should put the task aside to take up again. And when the task is completely finished, one should let it go with a thirst for the next and then the next. So there's two things here. We will need periods of rest when the energy begins to flag. We let go. We let go of the task. But when he says let go, he means really letting go, really abandoning for that time. It's not stopping and continuing to worry anxiously about the task. That's not the power of letting go. That would be sort of laziness. That would be the opposite of virya. Letting go means you really let go. You've been doing something, the energy is flagging. Now you let go. You completely let go. I think if one cannot let go, it means to that extent, the extent one can't let go of the task, the activity is ego-based. It's still self-centered. It's not fully skillful. One of the things I noticed about Bhante was that he could really let go. He could really let go. He writes in his travel letters about being in Maharashtra on the ordination retreat first ordination retreat, or first or the second, I can't quite remember which, up on this mountain, the Sinagad mountain in the Western Ghats. And, he got the retreat going and handed it over to Lokamitra to carry on leading it. And Bhante said he was quite content, and he had been giving a lot of lectures before this retreat. He was quite happy to sit in a room, it's a very, very plain room, and just look at the blue sky and the very, very plain brown mountains all around. And I remember seeing him do that. I remember, just watching him, just sitting there, completely relaxed, completely at ease, just looking at the sky, looking at the plain brown landscape, just being, I suppose. He was very good at that. There's a poem, in fact, written in Kalimpong years earlier called The Great Work. And it just describes him sitting in an armchair with a cat on his lap, just doing nothing. That's the great work. But at the same time, this isn't indolence in any way. When you finish the task, yes, you let go, you renounce, you abandon. But of course there is a thirst, and he uses the word trishna, usually a negative word translated as craving, but here used positively, a thirst for further activity, a positive thirst for continuous creative activity, we might say. The Bodhisattva is really the living synthesis of rest, profound rest and letting go, and meditation, deepest meditation, and activity. A verse which Bhante was very fond of when he first encountered it as a young man, from the Ratnagotra Vibhaga, describes the Bodhisattva like this: like a fire, his intelligence constantly blazes up, working for the welfare of the world. At the same time, he always remains in the calm of the dhyanas and the formless attainments. That's what we are aiming for in our Dharma life. When Bhante, we've often talked about Bhante's time in Nagpur after Dr. Ambedkar died, and all those lectures he gave, lecture after lecture, over a very short period of time, keeping the conversion movement alive. And I met people who were with him, translating for him at that time, and the way they'd go from place to place. And in one of his letters, in a letter to someone about that time, Bhante describes his experience of doing all these lectures as like being in samadhi. I think that's very significant. It was like being in samadhi. He was operating, he said, without thought, as if he was an impersonal force. That was the language he used. And at the end he felt refreshed. He didn't feel tired. He didn't feel in any way exhausted. So that perhaps gives a little glimpse of what the Bodhisattva might be like. Not that Bhante claimed that at any time that he was a Bodhisattva. Perhaps it gives us a little glimpse into the kind of activity that we need to be doing, that we're operating without thought, operating all the time as if we're in samadhi. Coming very near to the end of the talk now, we have the next power is the power of dedication. Tatparya is the word for dedication. It doesn't just mean dedication, it means devotion to one's highest aim. It means single-minded devotion to one's purpose in life. And again, Shantideva invokes very, very strong metaphors to describe the alertness needed for the practice of virya. One should guard against attacks from the defilements and resolutely attack them, as if engaged in a sword fight with a well-trained enemy. As then, one would hastily snatch up one's sword in fear did one drop it. So one should snatch up the sword of mindfulness when it drops. As poison, finding the blood, spreads throughout the body, so finding a weak point, a fault will spread throughout the mind. Amazing how that description, how quickly a fault can take hold. So you need to be vigilant and pick up that sword of mindfulness. One who has taken the Bodhisattva vow should be like someone superintended by swordsmen who is carrying a jar of oil, wholly intent upon it out of fear of death if he stumbles. So what an image, you're carrying along this oil on your head, and if you drop it, you are going to be chopped down by swordsmen. That's how we should be mindful of our Bodhisattva vow. So, on the approach of drowsiness or lethargy, one should immediately counteract it, as would jump up immediately were a snake to slide into one's lap. So there you are, afternoon meditation this afternoon at Padmaloka. You're sitting there. Well, when you start going like that, as some of us do, just think that is a deadly snake that just crawled into your lap and is going to bite you and fill you with poison. Be really good at, that would really wake us up, wouldn't it? I don't know if Satyaraja can arrange something this afternoon to make us feel that. At every single lapse one should burn befittingly with remorse, then reflect, how might I act so that this might not happen again? How might I act so that this might not happen again? So really checking yourself. Okay, you make an error. That's understood. How might I act so that this doesn't happen again? One should look forward to companionship for a given task with this motive. How can I practice the discipline of mindfulness in these circumstances? This is quite interesting, this business of how looking forward to companionship and reminding oneself of mindfulness with companionship. I was sort of wondering about that verse. Sometimes Shantideva is very, very terse, and I think he's describing a much bigger sort of picture. And what this put me in mind of was a conversation we had with Bhante on a seminar at Pamaloka a long time ago, and we asked him what he felt he'd had to really work on in his Dharma life. And we were a bit surprised by the answer, because he said mindfulness. He said mindfulness. I've really had to work on mindfulness. We were surprised because our experience of Bhante was of a very, very mindful person, very deliberate person, very careful about the way he walked, the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way he acted, very still person. And then he went a bit further. He said what he meant. He said, I really had to work on mindfulness, particularly when I was with others communicating the Dharma. Communicating the Dharma. Because, he said, I'd get very inspired communicating the Dharma. There would be some excitement in communicating the Dharma, and I would lose awareness. I would lose awareness. So he really had to get a hold of himself and work on that. So I wonder if that's the kind of thing Shantideva has in mind. Yes, you join together with others to communicate the Dharma. Well, be especially mindful, because it's so uplifting, it's so inspiring. Be particularly aware then when you're doing something so skillful. So the final two verses of the Virya Paramita describe the power of self-mastery, vashita, living, acting according to wish. Here, the Bodhisattva is described as being really versatile and responsive. This is important because, yes, the Bodhisattva is very, very single-minded in what they do. Very, very single-minded in their activity, but also versatile, responsive, aware, a broad awareness of the people around them, broad awareness of the situation and what's needed. So he says, remembering the teaching on vigilance, one should make oneself versatile, as one always prepares oneself prior to undertaking a task. In the very same way that cotton is swayed to the direction of the wind as it comes and goes, one should be directed by one's endeavour, and in this way one's spiritual power grows strong. One's spiritual power grows strong. The word for spiritual power is riddhi, which has connotations of sort of magical power. You talk about the riddhi of the king having the power of life and death. Well, the Bodhisattva, of course, what he's concerned with is the life, the spiritual life of all beings. And in the end, through his practice of Virya Paramita, he opens up to that great power of the bodhicitta. It seems fitting to end, given that Shantideva talks about Virya Paramita being like cotton, being swayed by the wind of his endeavour. It seems fitting to end with Bhante's poem, The Wind. So this concludes my exploration of Virya Paramita. The wind. A wind was in my sails. It blew stronger and fiercer hour by hour. I did not know from whence it came, or why. I only knew its power. Sometimes it dashed me on the rocks. Sometimes it spun me round and round. Sometimes I laughed aloud for joy. Sometimes I felt a peace profound. It drove me on, that manic wind, when I was young. It drives me still, now I am old. It lives in me. Its breath, my breath. Its will, my will.